And now, last but not least, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this week, Dr. William M. Ferris. He is Executive Director at RESILE, which is as well as its consultancy arm, which is kind of part of it. He'll explain more, called CIRCAD, which is the Center for Innovation and Risk Analysis for Climate Adaptation and Decision Making. William completed his PhD in economics at Virginia Tech, with focuses in environmental and natural resources and in development economics. William has served communities through past work with Virginia Tech Center for Economic and Community Engagement and with the City of Williamsburg in Virginia's Economic Development Office. So without further ado, thank you, Dr. Ferris.
Hey, everyone's great to be here. I'm going to borrow you for every presentation because that was the best intro that I've ever had. Thank you so much. Question, real quick. What are your backgrounds? Who's doing engineering? Who's doing, data? Who's doing modeling? Before we get into this, let's do a quick round robin, 10 seconds.
Should we do a hand raise situation?
No, because I don't know what to ask. I don't know who's doing what. I'm so new to the engineering game.
So let's start
Richard,
with
what do you do?
Yeah.
We'll start with you, Richard.
Oh, me, I am a structural engineer, I guess. Structural engineer doing hazards engineering at community.
Okay, Jasmine, real quick. We're just firing off names. I'm seeing who's on camera right now.
I like this.
Civil engineering, hazard management, and also some modeling.
Okay, Maria, and we'll do like one more after that.
Civil engineering, computational modeling with some social science aspects.
Okay, Shelly, last one, I promise.
I'm actually urban planning,
okay.
Flood resilient.
All right, so that's more my wheelhouse. So show of hands, who knows what economic development is? All right, I see two hands. Shelly, I knew you were going to put yours up. So the whole deal with economic development is it's basically about helping grow and build communities and businesses to be self-sustaining, resilient, etc. We serve as sort of the intermediary, and I'm talking about economic development, not RESILE, is the intermediary between, businesses and the community and how to basically bring everyone to the same table to support the right goals. Let me go ahead and share my slides and we'll kick this off. But let's see where we go.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'll just invite people. We know you're busy, we know you're in your Fridays. If you can, turn on your camera. It's the only time we get to see each other. And it's really nice to see everyone's faces. I understand. We promise we won't judge you for the way you look, but turn on your camera if you can. Thanks.
Okay. So can y'all see my slides, just to clarify before we begin?
Yes.
So today's talk, I am not an engineer. I'm not going to pretend to be an engineer, and I could never tell you all how to do your jobs. So my role in the work that I do, I'll talk about, is helping support the engineers in the research. And so that's going to be a little bit of the focus of today's talk, some best practices y'all might consider, because presumably a lot of bright minds here. Someone's going to launch a business. Someone's going to probably save the world and have an idea. And I want to help make sure that you have as few pain points as possible by, learning from what I've done wrong and, my field experience. So here we go. Risk science and community resilience. Y'all get the upgraded version 2, implications of community needs for prospective businesses. So to quickly begin, what do we do at RESILE? Our goal is to achieve high impact research in data science, modeling and risk assessment and decision theory and economic and policy analysis. Our goal is to develop actionable strategies, products, and practices to address climate risk. And with all of this, our aim is to develop knowledge that will enhance community, business, policymaker decision-making with the goal of fostering resilience. We effectively serve as a focusing point where, industry's here, researchers are here, industry money flows in, the research products go out. Our goal is to bring everyone to the same table, facilitate the conversations, and discover the shared needs, because obviously academics need funding and industry needs academics, and we're that happy, comfortable roundtable space. We do a lot of work in modeling and data analysis and decision science, as well as resilient community development. We have over 40 faculty members here at Duke University in the School of Law, the School of Business, School of Engineering, and the School of the Environment. I'm not sure if anyone here is Duke affiliated. Raise your hand if so. All right. So I'm the sole representative here. Go Duke, I guess. We also have collaborators at other institutions, UNC Wilmington, East Carolina University, University of Georgia. We've got a couple of planning districts that we communicate with regularly, and we're plugged in with the North Carolina Community College system. We have letters of collaborative interest from over 30 big banks, insurance companies, and reinsurance companies. Now, I'm assuming some of you are going to know what reinsurance is, but does anyone not know what reinsurance is? It's okay if so. All right, so reinsurance is who insures the insurance companies. So, you've got your State Farm and they're insuring your home, but let's say a big flood comes in, Katrina comes in, State Farm's out, millions, billions, whatever. State Farm has insurance policies to help insulate its own operations from, big financial shocks, and that's who the reinsurance companies are. And this will be relevant. I'll talk about this a little bit later being this slide, apparently. So we do this, what we do is motivated by climate change. Y'all are probably familiar with this, but we're probably going to blow through the 2 degrees Celsius targets for, climate change specified in the Paris agreements. And some people focus on, climate prevention, stopping CO2 from going out, things like that. Our group takes a little bit of a different focus. The bottom line is CO2 has a really long residence time in the atmosphere. I'm not a scientist, so I can't tell you the exact years, but we're talking years, decades. Don't quote me on that. But the reality of that is, even if we were to stop today, now all the CO2 is going to be up there for so long that, climate change has some momentum. It's not going to reverse overnight. So we're going to be stuck with a lot of the risks and the hazards that, are already happening and, are continuing to grow. So we can't just reduce emissions. We also have to acknowledge the fact that right now we're getting hit with hazards and risks. And so we need to manage our, risks in addition to emissions reduction. I'll tell you all about our website later. Feel free to go there. But just, discussing some of the challenges of risk management, it's really hard to forecast risks. The reason being a lot of these risks and hazards are what we call black swan events. They're nonlinear, they're rare, they're interconnected. There's a lot of global uncertainty and there's not a lot of relevant data. For instance, you can see on these headlines I quickly just pulled, these are recent headlines. I just want to drag them real quick. You can see from this article on Nature, changes in year-to-year temperature or variability are increasing. We now see the heat and rainfall extremes outside of, what we've seen in any kind of historic data, which means that we can't really predict the future based on the past anymore. Our data, our models are starting to break down. Furthermore, when we're talking about risk, one of the key things with risk management is insurance. And it's really hard to balance consumers' interests and, desires to be insured with insurers' needs for solvency, because the bottom line is insurers are for profit. So, they're not required to, write a policy for someone in most cases. And as a result, what happens is the current policy landscape leads to people getting dropped. Some of the, more interesting things, y'all might go down this rabbit hole later. I'd be happy to talk about it more. Some of the current policy framework precludes insurers from making use of all science modeling. There's a little bit of, climate denialism going on where, sea level rise projection modeling is kind of barred from being, included in the rate setting process. And so when insurers can't really adapt and communicate and confront the science or work with the science, they have to pull out because it's no longer profitable for them to basically turn a blind eye to the fact that the hazards are on their doorstep. Now, this is problematic for a number of reasons, but a lot of the issues with communities getting left high and dry, or flooded is a better way to put it, no longer high and dry. So this is felt acutely by lower income groups. And so when these groups, lose their coverage, they don't have a lot of financial capital to recover in the instance of, a flood or, sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, things like that. Just again, more headlines here, disproportionate risks of climate change are felt by low income communities. Farmers insurance is pulling out from Florida. I know, for instance, anecdotally, someone living on the coast of North Carolina, their policy got increased by 99% last year. And they were lucky that they didn't get dropped in the first place. So what do we need to solve these problems? Innovations in insurance, finance, and infrastructure to align products and practices with the scope and scale of climate change. We need systems level solutions to provide financial protection to communities in times of crisis. We need to incentivize community risk reduction, which will then help signal to insurers that, hey, it's safe to come back and keep working with us. We need to safeguard vulnerable communities, and we need to catalyze the development of climate solutions, which is where you all come in as the engineers. I'm here to support you. So pivoting to community resilience and environmental management, this is, there's a lot of overlap in these solutions. We've got the engineering, we've got the communities, we've got the business. I'd like to talk a little bit about what I do. I'll keep it super brief because the intro was top tier. I'm an economist with economic development background, not an engineer, not a modeler per se. I do some state statistical analysis, things like that, but my real focus is on development and environmental resources. Most of my work is focused on the Chesapeake Bay and sustainable and resilient community and economic development. I've done work in the tech sector, manufacturing, quarries, agribusiness. I've been on farms. I've been, zipping around in heavy machinery. It's a really cross-cutting field, and that's really cool because, so many different perspectives from different people on climate change, on, economic development, community needs. You kind of serve as a focusing point, and you get to kind of enter into a lot of the circles that are closed off to most. As was mentioned, I used to work for the city of Williamsburg as well as the Virginia Tech Center for Economic and Community Engagement. And, lived experience is so important. Diverse perspectives are so important. My personal lived experiences are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed in both rural and coastal environments. So this is where you'll see the RESILE logos off. This is where I wade into my personal thoughts a little bit. Gets a little more casual, a little more fun. Fun being relative, of course. My personal thoughts on resilience are that for communities to be resilient, they need to be insulated from shock, but also adaptive to change. The goal for communities is to brace for impact and continue moving forward while remaining open to course correction, because the bottom line is, since we can't really predict the future based on past data, we have to stay flexible while remaining optimistic and continuing to support communities and move forward. So when we talk about topics like environmental resilience and economics, I'm going to make the case quickly that you cannot divorce the two. In economics, I'm not sure how many of y'all have taken an econ class. Quick show of hands. Who's done economics before? I see a few hands. All right, so we hear about short run and long run shocks. Economics is a game of the short run and the long run. Your short runs are ones that hit you now and you can't really adapt for. Long runs are ones you can plan for a little bit better. An example of an economic shock to a business might be, a power outage stops a business and the community jobs are, temporarily hampered for a week. You can see, obviously, this could tie into environmental topics because let's say a storm is responsible for the short run shock, the power loss. Amina, I see a hand raised. I'm sorry. Is that with regard to the economics class, or do you have a question?
No, sorry, it didn't go down whenever it was time. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss you? What's going on?
No, it was with regards to the economics question.
Great. Okay. So anyway, with the short run shocks, obviously the crossover between econ and the environment is that climate changes increase weather variability, and that can affect businesses on the day-to-day. Now, setting sights in the long term, we're talking more about if an industry's future even exists or how industries might shift. When we hear about sea level rise, you could obviously think about, okay, well, you're a farmer and the sea level is going to, rise and salt water is going to intrude. You might see entire, swaths of coastal regions cut out from operative capacity. And that's, you see sea level rise threatening industries like agriculture, tourism, things like that. That's a crossover on the long run between economics and environmental topics. And so I'd like to, at this point now, turn some focus to some of the Chesapeake Bay research I've done, in which I'll make the case that you really cannot ignore community perspective and conversations when doing environmental management and stormwater engineering and topics of that nature. The first paper, I'll go into some of the acronyms, but it discusses basically what local governments are doing to achieve environmental compliance. And the second paper goes a little bit into the cost implications of what they're doing and why. First paper, it's a mouthful. The role of nutrient credit trading for total maximum daily load compliance by the urban stormwater sector, evidence from Virginia's municipal separate storm sewer systems. Now, just some quick background. In MS4, you can think of it as a local government for the sake of this conversation. Bottom line is local governments are very concerned by the fact that the Chesapeake Bay is very polluted and it's very expensive to clean. Within Virginia, the local governments can choose from a number of stormwater management processes called BMPs, or best management practices. You can think of this as stormwater engineering. I'm going to tie this into engineering. They can engage a lot of engineering practices to clean up the bay. They can also buy bay cleanup credits, which are similar to the cap and the carbon market trades that y'all probably heard about circa 2008, 2009. Water quality trading is the new hot topic, and it promises to be orders of magnitude lower in cost than some of the stormwater engineering practices. for, getting out nitrogen, phosphorus, total suspended solids, things like that. And the thing is, though, even though it's order of magnitude cheaper, no one's doing it. And that's really confusing. On paper, the golden egg, the solution is not, happening in practice in the communities. And I wanted to find out why that's happening and what's going on. So like any good researcher, I went into the government documents, had a lot of government conversations, just a lot of, interviews, data analysis, quantitative methods, qualitative methods, semi-structured interviews, things like that. I won't bore you with the specifics, but the reality is when local governments are seeking to achieve their reduction requirements, their bay cleanup requirements that the Environmental Protection Agency has set, they try to double dip. And I mean that in a good way. So let's say you're, Loudoun County up in Virginia, you're held by the by Virginia's government to reduce 1 million pounds of sediment in a given year. You can either buy these credits from, a third party and do it for the cheap, or you could put in bioretention ponds, retrofit your streams, things like that, to do it yourself for more expensive. But at the same time, when you do it yourself, you get a whole host of local benefits, such as, improved fishing ecosystems, amenity values, infrastructure protection to bring it back to hazards and things like that, erosion reduction. And so really what's going on is when the local governments are trying to decide how they're going to achieve these, these nutrient reduction targets, these pollution reduction targets, they're considering a lot of their local problems first, and they're trying to address those first. And then they're turning their focus to some of the broader regional and beyond goals. So implications of this, I'll tie this back into engineering, but then I wanted to focus a little bit on the cost implications because, the Chesapeake Bay cleanup is thought to be very expensive. But the reason it's expensive is because governments are choosing these solutions that double dip, and I mean that in a positive way. So really, the cost of the Chesapeake Bay cleanup is kind of overinflated in theory, I hypothesized, because the strategies chosen to clean the bay were chosen in response to other goals. And so what I did, I wanted to study, if in theory, let's pretend there were no local goals or local goals had already been met. What's the extra burden needed to actually clean the bay on top of these local stormwater engineering and management goals? Did linear programming, doesn't matter, won't bore you with it. But the reality is, by the time the MS4s, the local governments confront their local goals like infrastructure protection, erosion, in my modeling sense, it was sediment reduction. The remaining lift needed to achieve some of these other programmatic requirements by the EPA is very small. We're talking 25%, 2%, depending on the stipulations. I mean, it's really a minority component to clean the bay as far as cost goes by the time you've confronted your local water quality ambitions. So the implication of this is, when you've got this slam dunk of this low cost policy option that, fails to materialize, the reason it's failing to materialize is because, really communities and governments are so focused in a good way on their local needs that, academics such as myself can't really predict their behavior, and backseat driving on our end to tell them what they should do and why is very inappropriate in my opinion, because they're very rational and they've got a whole host of community grassroots experience on what their needs actually are rather than what the literature might, predict. So what this means, again, as I mentioned, paper solutions don't always materialize into realized outcomes. So what was previously thought to be a no-brainer solution to compliance goals has failed to materialize. The reason that, the theorized credit trades are not really happening is because, surprise, surprise, local governments know what they're doing. They've got these local, infrastructure protection goals. They've got these local sediment goals that they have to address. And the real message here is that local considerations are highly influential on realized behavior, and you really need to know your region in which you're operating. So this is where we start to turn it into some of the best practices y'all might use when you eventually, save the world with your engineering and your startups. Now, I applaud all of those of you who are creating these great tools, these modeling approaches, a lot of great stuff going on. I even read the other day how they're trying to store carbon in cement in building infrastructure, things like that. Great products and ideas that I could never have thought of on my own, but I do want to support with the best of my ability. So I've done a lot of economic development work, and no matter who I talk to, no matter what industry I'm talking, farmers, IT, manufacturing, there are a couple of pain points for businesses and that really seem to stick out. Number one, the big challenge is growth and marketing. Number two, it's talent attraction and retention and labor force development. Number 3, it's company morale. And number 4, it's capital. And so, we've talked about, the importance of knowing your community, because you need to know your community to make sure your solution works. I would say that, if you're starting an engineering business, if you're doing something like that, you really need to just kind of plug in and kind of know your audience a little bit. Your growth in your marketing is going to come from, knowing your customer. Oftentimes, and I say this as someone that's lightly dabbled in small business myself, you come in with an idea and you have these wild, goals and aspirations. And it's like, okay, what's going on? Where's all the interest? Why is no one buying? You really have to just know your customer and know your community and know what they need. I'm a big believer in not backseat driving. And so I think the more you can kind of network and plug in and just get out of your office and speak with people on their perspectives, that's how you find out their pain points. And when you know their pain points, you can come to them with the solution. And that's where you really start to get some momentum. Another issue you might run into when you launch your business is talent attraction and labor force. You have to know your local talent pool, and you have to know what they need to succeed and what your community offers. So let's say, for instance, we were looking at a project on indoor agriculture, very engineering heavy, very high tech stuff. Basically controlled environment agriculture is the more technical phrase. And, when you're choosing to potentially start a business, you have to know who has the skills and what skills you're going to need. You have to know, are there scientists in the area who can work on the robotics? If not, what can we do to develop them? And, really these processes, if you're looking to stick around and last in the long term, plug in with your local workforce development board, talk to them about, what kind of training you can get from the community college system to help grow that talent pipeline to support your business in the long run, so you don't fizzle out on the 5, 10, 15-year horizon. Morale is another big thing. You have to know, who you're working with. You have to, know your employees if you want them to stick around. The other one that's very interesting is, capital needs. A lot of times your local economic development authorities have really interesting grants that you could go after. There's a lot of public funding you can go after and resources you can chase. And they generally want to help, because if you're coming in with an engineering solution, you're talking about jobs that have, great potential to trickle down and, and grow the tax base, support employment in all these other sectors. Shelley, you're an urban planner, so you probably, have done an economic impact analysis, but there's all these complicated matrices where you could plug in like $1,000, $1 million of simulated investment in one industry, and you can kind of track how it'll blossom. So you put something in something like engineering. It's a pretty high impact job. You'll see, jobs pop up in support industries, in, HVAC, things like that, things you could never expect. So there are a lot of great grant opportunities and people looking to support you in these business development needs. As I mentioned, don't be a backseat driver. The tools you really need to use at your disposal are the ones that will help make sure your business case is solid. Economic feasibility studies are something you could look into, and I'd be happy to discuss at any point in a pro bono capacity, because I love talking about this kind of stuff. Economic feasibility studies are really just looking to make sure the business case is solid and the potential for its growth on the long run before you go ahead and invest $1 million. You need to make sure that the $1 million is actually going to support the community. And one of the interesting things about these is, some of the public funding that's available, you're required to do these. The reason being, public entities are required to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and they want to make sure the due diligence is there. So the one thing I cannot recommend enough is to do a feasibility study, get an economic developer, get an urban planner, someone of that nature, to kind of really take a look at your footprint, where you want to operate, your potential for growth, and where the impact is. And that'll do two things. First, it'll tell you, hey, does this business idea fly, and is it worth investing? And number two, it'll send a strong signal to potential grant funders that, hey, these people know what they're doing, and let's help them, support them with some of our grant funding. And it's often required in some cases. As I mentioned, cannot, speak enough to the importance of just having community conversations and, hearing about their needs for engineering solutions, other solutions, focus groups. Because as I mentioned with my own research, there's often one idea on paper that makes sense, and the communities might be somewhere else. And it's really important to find out how to meet in the middle so everyone moves forward together. Thanks for your time. We'll keep it super brief, but at this point, I figured I'd leave a little time if anyone has any thoughts, questions about economic development, about resilience, how that overlaps with engineering. That's what I have for you all today.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to ask a question first, if no one else has an immediate question. I just wanted to clarify about some of the findings from your research. So you were saying that like some of the objectives in the legislation or in the policies that are used to make sure that we're protecting the bay or cleaning, upholding basic standards, environmental regulations, that legislation is not incorporated into the actual solutions, or rather you found that there were solutions that were not being kind of unified, so it was causing the speculative price for the investment to go up. So you're saying like a better incorporation of the actual engineering solutions and their cost into the legislation could help make the barrier to entry for local governments could lower the barrier of entry for local governments. Does that make sense?
So those are some great thoughts. That's not quite the message. It's very close. So effectively what is going on is, the bay is dirty. The Environmental Protection Agency requires, you to hit certain accounting targets, paper targets. You're responsible for reducing, I don't know, 1 million pounds of nitrogen, 500,000 pounds of phosphorus, et cetera. And these are targets that they say, go do it, figure it out, and come back to us with a solution. And so the disconnect is that, these nutrient credits are super low cost ways to purchase, credit towards these reduction requirements. And it should be a slam dunk because it's cheap and no one's really been buying the credits in Virginia. And that's the interesting question right there. And so what's going on is, okay, well, no one's buying a low cost option. They're doing a lot of, as you mentioned, in-person engineering type solutions, stormwater engineering and management. It's more expensive. What's going on? And so when you find out that the reason that they're doing these higher cost on-site choices is because they have these other goals besides bay cleanup, then the accounting kind of gets questionable, or not questionable, it gets interesting, because if you think it costs, I don't know, 5 billion, 10 billion, 15 billion to clean the bay, but at the same time, these solutions are, higher in cost because they're being selected to also clean local water quality and achieve local goals. Well, suddenly, perhaps, it might not be quite as expensive to clean the bay as we thought, because that sticker shock, that big price tag, is not just cleaning the bay, it's cleaning the bay while protecting infrastructure, while reducing erosion, while improving habitats. So in effect, these high prices that, are being suggested may not fully capture the degree to which we get a lot of other benefits from the activity currently on the ground. And so, whether that means that, we could think about the bay as being more affordable to clean, or that we could think about it as, what we're getting more bang for our buck than we anticipated. There's different ways to kind of, shift the narrative, but
I see.
there are a lot of interesting implications in that, the main focus here is that the communities I've spoken with really have their focus on their immediate local goals, and then they will, do their local mitigation and then use that to achieve bay paper goals, the nitrogen reduction goals, the on paper goals for the region. So the main implication is, look, they're really turning their focus to their immediate local environment, which is justified. It's understandable. I get it. It just means that, perhaps maybe it's not so expensive to clean the bay, and environmental compliance costs are perhaps overblown in some cases. And I'm kind of spitballing here. These are my own views, not those of my co-author, to be very clear. He and I both agree on most things. I can't speak without him present to his personal opinions on that.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, thank you. Rajendra, you had a question? Do you want to ask it?
Yeah, I have a question. So I think these are not bad questions. You can read from chat box and answer will. So it will be easy. Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Let me go ahead in there if you don't mind. Give me half a second, y'all. You do have a question. All right, so everyone, the question is, how could you identify something at risk? Would you please briefly discuss about the anticipatory actions on risk management and climate change adaptation? What distinguishes disaster management from preemptive or anticipatory action? Is this the same move to reduce risk? That is a great question, and that is spoken like an engineer, and I am not an engineer, but bear with me as I do my best as an economist, excuse me. Can't tell if I'm screen sharing still. So from a financial standpoint, I can speak a little bit about it. I mean, actually identifying and modeling the areas that are at risk is what other people in my center do, what everyone else does. I'm there to kind of serve as the communicator and things of that nature. Now, speaking from a financial standpoint, if we're talking about risk management, I think it's interesting in that when a lot of conventional business analyses, net present value analyses, discussions of like costs and benefits often consider what you're getting for what you're spending. It's interesting if you shift the narrative, and it's important to consider what costs you're avoiding. So like, let's say I'm going to put in a seawall as a risk management or risk prevention type choice. I don't know. It costs $1 million and there's no income stream coming from it. Okay, well, that doesn't mean the seawall is a bad financial decision, because if my seawall prevents $1 million of damage, well, then suddenly it's a very different business case versus, putting in a bunch of rocks that lead to zero revenue. So if we're talking about anticipatory actions and risk management and, that kind of thing, and what distinguishes disaster management from preemptive or anticipatory action, I think, it's really about just shifting the focus to, cost avoidance and damage avoidance, and, kind of taking an ahead of time, approach or predictive approach to what might happen down the road. And you can't just look at, the costs of, doing this or that and what revenue, what changes might happen. You have to also consider the fact that, cost avoidance is a very accurate and valid consideration. Now, that's from an economist. I'm not a modeler, so you have to bear with me. The whole, risk ID, that's beyond my wheelhouse. I can only talk about the money.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. You answered
Sure.
from
I hope I did
$3.3.
somewhat, close to what you're looking for.
Okay.
Confirmation on abstract submission. That's not a question for me.
Does
Anything
anyone
else?
else have a question?
I do see third-party insurance for risk sharing of national insurance. Rajendra, was that the third-party insurance? Did you want to clarify what you meant by that? Did you need any clarification on that?
Yeah. Previously, I got you explained about the reinsurance, right? For the risk sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the point.
I have another question, because most of us, actually not me, but a lot of us are engineers, and my question would be for a lot of us are early career engineers, people who are kind of designing research projects, finishing dissertations, trying to figure out how to make their research relevant or to ground it in real world application. So I guess, what would your advice be to engineers who are having some trouble trying to figure out how to ground their research in real world application?
I would say the more conversations you can have, the better. My personal view, if I had to give some advice, is just go in with a bit of a listening mentality. The more you can reach out and say, hi, I'm, an early engineer. I've got a research idea. Can I discuss? And ask someone, for their thoughts and their expertise. You don't have to discuss your, engineering project. You don't have to give away your golden egg or whatever. But I cannot speak enough to the value of having as many conversations as possible with people in your target industry as well as other industries. We're currently going through some NSF training as a center. And, I'm just going to, borrow loosely quote the program officer or one of the representatives from it is saying, look, 90% of your conversations might not have like that gem, that nugget of wisdom, but the 10% that do are gonna set you apart leaps and bounds. So for instance, I do environmental work, economics type work, and one day I was driving around a quarry. Never thought I'd be in a quarry. Don't tell my mother. I was surrounded by rocks and sediment piles. She would have a heart attack. And talking to him, he's like, hey, yeah, these are our big boulders, and we use those for Chesapeake Bay cleanup and, Chesapeake Bay infrastructure. So, you wouldn't have really figured out that some of these industries are linked and the supply chain processes unless you actually get out and about and start talking. So I think if you have a really interesting engineering product, the more you could talk with, your target clients as well as people in their supply chain and try to identify the pain points, that's really where you're going to start, paving the way for, getting your research on the ground and moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of way to frame it too, because it seems like kind of what you're saying, a lot of the people here might do research on something that's like very technical or very specific to a certain element of how buildings interact with wind or how structures interact with certain types of sedimentation. during an earthquake, for example. And you're saying in this case, like to ground research that is so theoretical in real world applications would be identifying a case, maybe a region that you're specifically looking into, and then making sure that you're actually asking people about the experience of, say, going through a hazard, or
Yes.
like making sure that you're interviewing local government about the ways in which they have tried in the past to mitigate certain issues, and so what hasn't worked and why, so people can better understand how to like basically communicate their research in a way that would be useful.
Sure, absolutely. I think you know, just making sure that all parties have a voice in the process is very important. You know, I mean, there's so many different decision makers that, you know, to go from, you know, okay, an engineering product has been developed. How do we, you know, commercialize it, and how in the commercialization process, how do we make sure that, you know, I mean, you have to know your customers, you know, way down the horizon. You have to know who's there to help you with the commercialization process. You know, what kind of labor force might be necessary, what region you should put your business in. So if you've got this idea, I mean, but just it's just super broad, but just start having conversations and just talk to literally as many people as possible, and go in there with a very listening heavy mentality rather than a sales mentality. And that will get you, I speak from experience. You know, I've gone in there, you know, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. It's the last thing anyone wants to hear. You got to go in there and, you know, hey, how can I help? And then, you know, you hear their pain points, then you can kind of adjust your business case and your value proposition accordingly.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Don't be shy. About the economics, about certain policies, about the Chesapeake Bay.
I have a question about RESILE in general. Is there a way for us to connect or become more involved in this work?
Absolutely. Tell you what, I will send my email out and our website out. We've got a LinkedIn, we've got a listserv, we've got the whole 9 yards. If y'all are interested in connecting, we'd love to you know, if you want to one-on-one and chat with us and talk about ideas and things, talk about Duke, not talk about Duke, I'm more than happy to connect at any point.
Yeah, I actually have a follow-up question. Can you tell us a little bit more about RESILE, what you do, and like its relationship with CIRCAD?
Sure. So RESILE is for all intents and purposes, no, you're fine. You're fine. So CIRCAD, we're exploring and starting to launch a prospective NSF-funded center that would connect industry and academia, for lack of a better term. Let's just put it that way. Now, RESILE is like, you could think of it like an umbrella organization housed at Duke. We've got a number of projects under our, you know, under our belt, trying to grow the CIRCAD Center, which we have collaborators with the University of Georgia as well. That's one arm of what we do. We're trying to investigate and grow this, you know, research center. Another thing we do some, this is more, you know, my personal contribution to it as far as research goes. Currently pursuing some NSF funding to do some resilient coastal development research with our collaborators at ECU, University of Georgia. While we're here on campus, we think it's very important to mentor and give back to the campus community. So we're trying to organize various workshops and symposiums to help, you know, give voice and agency to those with diverse lived experiences in climate change, while also providing mentorship and job training and things like that to some of the students here at Duke University. Now, the reason I've been talking in a very future tense is we actually just launched in February. We've been behind the scenes a little bit. I've had to kind of play dumb on a couple things. We've had a lot of irons in the fire for a little while now, but we just launched in 1 month ago. It's the day, actually. So we're very excited to you know, start being more public facing with our goals and aspirations. But with all these ideas lined up, we're basically an umbrella organization that has a mentorship wing, a Duke-based research wing, and a, you know, broad industry academia research wing, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. It's cool to learn about, one, congratulations on the launch, but
you.
two, to learn about how different universities are starting to establish more resilience, interdisciplinary and resilience-focused research centers, because one, it's very prescient, relevant to the era that we're living through in climate change, but also the fact that almost anywhere has exposure to risks. It just depends on what type of risks it's exposed to. So in Florida, for example, the NHERI network has the wall of wind, and 2 universities have focused on wind and hurricane research as well as flooding. In California, there's the Sim Center, which is at Berkeley, and they conduct a lot of simulations, but a lot of them are focused on earthquakes. So it's really interesting to see different universities that are also kind of getting their irons in the fire, I guess.
Sure. Well, any other questions? I don't think I'm still screen sharing. Oh, maybe I am. Don't be a backseat driver. Sorry, that's a really ominous slide to have left it on for like 10 minutes. No, that was something someone told me very early on in my environmental economics career. And so I just have to put that up there. Anyway, anyone else? Last minute questions? Let me see, a couple things are in the chat. Thank you for the presentation. Insurance policy. Anybody? Rajendra, I think you might be muted unless you were talking.
Yeah, you're muted.
Yeah, I have also posted another question there in the chat box. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're discussing reinsurance policy. How could reinsurance action help local level insurance and financial institutions during and after disaster? So my thoughts on that. So I can only speak from a personal view on this one. In my experience, and I'm drawing heavily from some conversations that I've heard, some presentations that I've heard. So these words are, hardly original thought, but in conversations and presentations I've been in, the understanding that I've been told and heard is that the reinsurance industry is heavily a champion for the science. Now, speaking as an economist, we talk about aligning incentives. The reinsurance industry has an incentive to make sure, the science is there because they're supporting the insurance industries. And if, unfortunately, the insurance industry is somewhat hamstrung with their policy flexibility, ability to operate within a policy framework, the reinsurance industry is really a champion for climate science and things of that nature. So that's the extent to which I can speak on it from a personal view. Others I could connect you with who have a more nuanced perspective.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, very
Sure
interesting.
thing.
Okay.
Sure thing. All right, guess that's it. Thanks, everybody.